Thank you all for being here. We only have 1 hour to go through this work, and I want to be sure that there's time for questions. We do have elementary, middle, and high school teachers, and it looks like some babies on this call. So we are so happy that you're all here and making time for us. So again, that slide deck is in the chat. We're up to 40 participants, and we are recording this so that we can share it on the digital learning channel at a later date. As we go through, if there are questions or there are things that are unclear, drop them in the chat. Jenny Aberly is here to help out. And also feel free to unmute yourselves and yell at me and just say, I don't understand, help me out. This is something our teachers are going to struggle with, or that I'm going to struggle with in my PLC. So please just unmute yourselves and ask the questions. Today's session is designed for you to be able to take back to your school and do with your PLCs or coach your PLCs at your school in doing. So hopefully you'll find the resources useful, and if we've missed any pieces, please feel free to let us know. So again, the presentation is in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, Annie, the slide deck is in the chat again.
Suzanne, how do you do that so fast? I was ready and you beat me.
All right, so today we're going to focus on scoring and calibrating scoring and giving feedback on the mid-year benchmark in ThinkCERCA. So our agenda is going to be how to grade in ThinkCERCA, and we're going to spend only a brief amount of time on that part because it's pretty intuitive, and there are some existing resources out there that I'm going to show you. For example, a screencast video that takes you through step-by-step what to click on, but I'll talk about that briefly. We're going to talk a little bit about effective feedback, talk through the rubrics, and then the most important part of what we're doing today is I have leveled student work at 4th, 7th, and 10th grade, and we're going to go through a process of digging into that work and scoring it on the ThinkCERCA rubric. And then again, you'll be able to take back all of the links that are in this session and all of the student work, and you'll be able to go through this work with your PLCs in this process so that we have a common understanding of what proficiency looks like in our PLCs, because our next instructional steps are only as good as the data that we have around student performance. And then furthermore, students' growth in writing is only as good as the feedback that we're giving them on this. So hopefully this will be some steps toward calibration and getting on the same page around what quality writing is in grades 3 through 12 in JCPS. And so on the benchmark for the mid-year or beginning of year or end of year, you're always going to use the rubric scoring option in ThinkCERCA. And so you'll see a screenshot here. This is exactly the screen that's going to appear for you when you go into, or when your teachers go in to score their work. If you are a coach or a resource teacher on this call and you would like to support your teachers in grading, or be able to look at the student work, or support them in giving feedback, you will need to be added as a co-teacher in their class. And so that's just, I know there are some resource teachers and coaches who are supporting their teachers in that way. So I just wanted to share that with you, that you can be added as a co-teacher and you'll be able to see all of the student work. And so what you'll see here is the student work on the left. Then you'll have the rubric progression over here on the right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You'll see the indicators, and then there is a space for additional feedback here on the bottom right side, and then you can, of course, submit the grade once you go through that process. You can also return the assignment for revision, but just don't forget to have your students be sure to get it back to you and ultimately submit it for a grade. Otherwise, you won't have access to the data in the dashboard. You can annotate students' work over here, like you can highlight things and put notes as well. And I'm going to share with you some feedback stems that are going to make this process a little more efficient for you. And so this is how the rubric, the scoring screen looks in ThinkCERCA, and you're going to access that from your Classes tab. And so here on this slide, what you'll find is a couple of links that will support you in how to coach your teachers, or if you're a teacher, how to get to that scoring screen. So again, this is how it looks in platform, how to grade on the rubric. And then if you click this link, use these steps, what you'll see here in this link is a little 17-minute video that shows you step by step how to click on the little blue bells and access the student work. It also has the steps here written out for you. So if your teachers would prefer to watch a screencast of how to do it, that's up here. If they prefer to do the step-by-step, it's here. We have had lots of middle school and elementary schools give the mid and end of year benchmark, high schools too. We have not really had many teachers struggle with how to do the grading. What we have learned is that the calibration is the most important part. And so if you remember back in this slide, I talked about the feedback piece here. So if we're looking at the claim component, claim counterclaim component of the rubric, which we're going to look at later, and we said that the student is developing, or maybe even at a 2, we're going to want to give specific and actionable feedback to that student. And if the student scored very low in that area, we may want to assign it as a growth area down here. In order to make that feedback process a little bit faster, what we've put together for you here is a list of feedback stems that you can just copy and paste into that additional feedback spot. And so we know that when we're grading essays, often we'll see themes. Well, students that struggle with claim or counterclaim, may have a similar issue in their writing. And so in order to make this process more efficient, you could split your screen on your computer, or put one on each, one on the rubric on the monitor and this on another monitor, and then you can copy and paste these feedback stems into the feedback spot on ThinkCERCA. And so for each area of the rubric, we have strengths and areas of growth that are just canned feedback for you to copy and paste in there, or that you can edit within your own PLC. So I just wanted to share that with you as well today to make this process more efficient. And so that is really the how-to of the grading. You select classes, you click on the benchmark, and then there's going to be little blue bells with the student work. And then you're going to see that rubric screen. And so Jenny, is there anything in the chat that I need to address, any questions or comments to raise up about this piece?
I think we're good. There was just one question about what you meant by calibration of scoring. What was being calibrated? So my response there was that we're calibrating to make sure that we are scoring as accurate as possible as teachers. Would you have anything to add to that, Suzanne?
I'm so sorry. I had my volume turned down and it said you were talking and then I didn't hear. I apologize. Can you say it one more time? I missed just the very little first part.
That's okay. It was just a question about calibration, a little, wanting a little more explanation of what you mean by calibration of scoring.
Sure, and we're gonna dig really deep into that piece. And so the idea would be if Jenny and I, and I'm gonna pick on Isabel over at DOS, if we're in a PLC and we've all given the benchmark and we are teaching 9th grade, we want to make sure that we have a common understanding of what we're looking for, of what proficiency looks like, of what a 3 is, of what a 4 is, of what mastery looks like, right? What we can't have is different teachers with different understandings of the rubric and what we're scoring people. And so, for example, another element of that is understanding what grade level production looks like. This is a benchmarking exercise. And so we want to make sure that the purpose of this isn't to grade. The purpose is feedback and designing instruction to support student writing. And so we need to make sure that we have the same understanding of proficiency for all of our 8th grade writers. It does us no good to inflate our scores.
It is, and this is the second call I've gotten today, and I've already called back, and I'm in a meeting for work right
Ms.
now.
Olmstead, I think, can you mute yourself? So we want to be doing this work in our PLCs of ensuring that
I already have a person that I'm working with.
Rubric.
I've already talked with him. Yeah, I've already called back, and I've already worked. I'm working with Danny. All right.
Answer the question, Jenny.
Bye-bye.
Yes, that was my question and it answered it. Thank you. I was just making sure I understood the language that you were using.
Yep. Okay, so thanks, Cindy. Please feel free to jump in anytime. Thanks for that. All right, so now we're going to dig into the rubrics, making sure that all of us here, have a common understanding of CERCA and how the rubrics connect to CERCA. And then we're going to do a norming activity with some student writing. And so any of us who have been using this platform know that the CERCA framework involves claim, evidence, reasons and reasoning, counter arguments, and audience. And so the rubric is designed around this same framework for argument. And so on this slide, you'll just see some clear definitions of each component. This might be an important thing to think about going over with your PLCs. We all agree that quality claims are specific and debatable and defensible, right? And so thinking about how the rubric fleshes that out at each grade level is an important piece. And so I have these definitions here so that we all have a common understanding. And so the goal, of course, of the framework is that students are developing proficiency around developing, communicating arguments, whether that's in writing or speaking. And so here, the levels of the rubric are really important to understand, and I've added in some things in bold for us here. So this is a 5-point rubric rather than the 4-point that some of us are used to in terms of an NAPD rubric. So the 5-point rubric allows for more granularity in differentiating student performance and in giving feedback. And so a 1 means that the component is not present, 2, attempted, 3, we're developing, 4 is proficient, and 5 is exemplary. And so just understanding these levels of the 5-point and having a common understanding of developing, attempted, proficient, and so forth, I think is a really important piece as you're working through this with your PLCs. And we're going to dig into in the FAQs at the end of the presentation some nuances of the rubric that's really important for all of us to understand. So now, at this point in the presentation, I'd really like all of you to click on this argumentative link here. That's going to bring up a zip file that has all of the rubrics, grades 3-12. I have linked the informative and the narrative here for you, but you don't need those right now. They're just there for you to have. So for the argumentative, for the benchmark, we're using the argumentative rubric. So please click and download that. If you have a Chromebook, it's my understanding you need to use 2 fingers when you click on the zip file. There will be a drop down and you can click unzip. So it should open for you. So that's a Chromebook thing. So please go ahead and click on this. And if you are an elementary school teacher, open the 4th grade rubric. If you are a middle school teacher, open 7th. And if you are a high school teacher or coach, open the 10th grade rubric. So I'm going to give you just a minute to do that.
Sam, which one does middle school open again?
7th grade.
Okay.
All right, so hopefully, again, if you're elementary, you're gonna have that 4th grade rubric open, middle school 7th, and high school 10th. So you'll have access to those now, and then we'll move forward here. All right, so a few notes for my middle school colleagues. If a student in 7th grade or above does not have a counter argument, they cannot be scored higher than a 2. And that's consistent with the Common Core standards and what's expected in compositional writing in 7th grade and above. So I think that's a really important thing for your PLCs to recognize. For organization, audience, and conventions, of course, we know as English teachers that we're considering the whole of the essay. The specific elements, we should be looking for those to exist, and then we should be evaluating the quality using the rubric. And then, of course, the limitations of the platform cannot be the reason for a downgrade in convention. So that's, and you all know that. I just wanted to include that in here. And so we're going to kind of go through this process here. And so I'm going to differentiate this for my audience here. So if you are an elementary school coach or teacher, you're going to be living in slides 16 through 20, and you'll see some 4th grade work there. If you are a middle school teacher coach, you'll be living in slides 21 to 25. And if you are high school, you will be living inside slides 26 to 30. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And on my screen, you're going to see the elementary text. But if you're middle and high, you're going to be looking at your specific draft. So if you would go to the slide. So again, if you're elementary, you're on slide 16. If you're middle, you're on slide 21. And if you're high, you're on slide 26. And so what you need to do on this first slide is take a look at your rubric, which you've already opened, and then take a look at the prompt that we're dealing with. And this will take you out to ThinkCERCA. And so I just want you to spend a moment taking a look at the prompt and the rubric. So just spend one moment doing that, and then we will go through this norming process. All right. So if you all in your presentations could move to the next slide in your bundle. So the second slide of middle school, the second slide of high school, what you're going to see is some student writing. And so if you're an elementary school person, you're going to see this 4th grade writing. If you're middle school, you're going to see the 7th grade writing. And if you're high school, you're going to see 10th grade writing. Does everybody understand what I'm saying here? Are we all on the right spot here? We're looking at some student writing. And so the first thing we're going to do is take a couple of moments to identify the claim, evidence, reasons, and reasoning. And so if you all could look at your writing, and in the chat, you might just quickly put, C semicolon, and put the claim, or, you might just identify those quickly. in the chat. So we're going to spend a couple of minutes, and then when I say chat waterfall, you're going to hit return, and we'll see our responses here. And so what we're looking for initially is there a claim? Is there evidence, reason, and reasoning? And just to be really clear, I think in elementary and middle, we sometimes conflate reason with reasoning. So in this example, in 4th grade, video games are harmful to real-world relationships. If that extended into because, and there was then that would be a reason. Here, the reason is video games take away from real-world relationships. Reasoning elaborates on the evidence. It analyzes how the evidence supports the claim. And so it's really important that our teachers, that we have a clear understanding about the difference between reasons and reasoning. And so if you could take just a few minutes and identify those portions when I say chat waterfall, just hit enter and put them in the chat. All right, if you have identified the claim, evidence, reason, and reasoning in your writing piece, and I'm sorry, high school folks, I know this is a little fast, your piece is a little longer. Please go ahead and hit enter, and let's take a look at the chat. All right. So as we look at this elementary example, I've color coded it. And so this may be something you want to do with your PLCs, or it's just something that could be annotated. So the claim is in red, the evidence is in yellow. We see the reason in orange and the reasoning in peach, right? Where we have that extended dependent clause that's elaborating here, which means playing video games, right? And so here are those components. In lavender, I've highlighted the attempted conclusion. So there is no introduction in this elementary school piece. And so our next step, once we've identified those, let's go ahead and look at our rubric and just on a sticky note, looking at claims, evidence, reason, and reasoning. What score would you give on the ThinkCERCA rubric at your level? And then we'll have a little discussion. So just a couple minutes, what score would you give? And remember, rubrics are designed such that the first items in the rubric, if there are levels, should be the prioritized content. So if we're talking about organization, the grouping of ideas, introductions and conclusions are more highly prioritized in scoring than transitions. So I think that's just an important thing to remember. So go ahead and score those elements that we've identified and we'll talk about it. All right. So let's go ahead and talk about this middle school example. I know both high school and elementary, you all scored yours, and we'll talk about those quickly as well. So middle school people on the call, how did you score the claim? I'll have a few brave souls unmute themselves, please. Maybe two folks share how you scored this claim. The authors present good evidence to convince readers that student choice is important for healthier eating. What are your thoughts on that claim?
I think, I'm guessing this is an example where they don't present well, I would say it's a 2 based on this rubric.
I think the claim is too vague. I mean, the authors present good evidence. I don't think that that's sufficient enough. So I would say a 2 as well.
Okay. All right. And so we see this reason highlighted in orange. I know this because what are our thoughts on reason? Where do we rank that? Okay, anybody else? What do we think? Middle school folks, where are we scoring reasons on this rubric?
I would say a 1 because they don't give a reason. It
Okay.
just says because and then stops and starts to give evidence.
Okay, and what about evidence, Annie? I'll just have you go on. Thank you so much.
I have to go back to my rubric.
Sorry.
That's okay. It's not a 1 or a 2. I'm looking at between the others. Because they give evidence and it supports the idea that they need student choice.
But is it proficient?
Sorry, what?
So if we were to give it a 4, we would be saying that their use of evidence was proficient.
I have a question about this.
Yes.
My first gut reaction was a 3 because it's not cited, it's just stated, there's none of that. But if you're really looking at what the claim says, which is they present good evidence, then is the claim that they present good evidence, or is the claim that student choice is better eating? Is that
Yeah, so I
cutting
think
hairs?
the wording
No.
of the prompt is cloudying, right?
Okay. So
Right?
then I would have to go for a 3. I mean, it's decently chosen evidence that supports the healthy eating,
Yes.
but it's not cited right.
Right. And so same thing with evidence as we think about the leveling in the rubric. If we are prizing the use of evidence that supports the claim over the citation, right? And so here what you'll see for each grade level, and I've just pulled up 7 here, you'll see the score that we gave it and then a rationale. And so for 4th grade and for 10th grade, you'll have this information. And so I think something of note here, again, for organization, there's no introduction. The student moves right into the claim. It doesn't transform the claim, it's just restated. And so I think the analysis of the student writing here in the rationale can really support teachers in appropriately prioritizing pieces within the rubric and actually finding evidence for their scores in student writing. And so as we look at this example for 7th grade, this would not be proficient writing. This is about, looks like overall between a 2 and a 3. So this is a developing writer. And so
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
For the reason, so just by saying, I know this because we feel like that's a 2 and not a 1 because they're attempting to state a reason?
Yes, because a 2 is an attempt.
Okay, so there's an attempt even, okay.
Yep.
Got it.
And so then, of course, our next step would be based on this information, the score and the rationale, the evidence that we're seeing within student writing, what are our instructional next steps? So what I would like you all to do right now is if you are elementary, I'd like you to look at this slide that shows the scoring for the elementary piece. If you're middle, I'd like you to look at this slide that shows the scoring and rationale for 7th. And if you're high school, I'd love for you to look at this slide. And then I would like us to talk about what the instructional next steps are based on the rationale and the evidence in the student writing. And so I'm going to give you just a moment to look at this scoring against your own scoring. You may disagree. You may think that the organization for this high school piece is not a 4. That's okay. But using this rationale, what are the instructional next steps for this student? What should the teacher be planning to provide support on for this student that's going to move their writing forward? All right. So I see some of you putting in this in the chat. So we're going to kind of move backward from 10th to 7th to 4th. And I'll just have some folks unmute themselves and talk about what would be the things they would work on with this student in question. So if you're a high school teacher, what would you first work on with this 10th grade student? I would love anybody to unmute themselves and say what they would do instructionally.
I think, I mean, a lot of people have sort of said this in the chat, but the reasoning portion is definitely weak. That statement that the evidence backs up the idea that regulating unhealthy choices will keep people healthy because it shows how research was done. It's not really expanded or fully thought out. And it's not fully connected to the evidence. They would need to bring that evidence back in and kind of unpack it and explain it more.
And so I'm making some assumptions that a lot of our 10th graders probably, and a lot of our 7th graders, and a lot of our 4th graders need to work on reasoning, because that's the critical thinking. That's the analytical part of writing. What are some ways, how would we do that? How do we support students in strengthening their reasoning?
I can share, and I teach ESL English 1, but for my kids, a lot of time, just those individual conversations, or I guess through, voice typing digitally or however you want to do it, but, really having them say, okay, so why did you pick that piece of evidence? How does that specifically support the claim? Kind of getting them to think about the relevance. And then for me too, making sure, do you understand the evidence that you chose? And not that they just found something and copied and pasted it. So for me, it's more a lot of that conferencing and one-on-one to make sure, kind of check those things off. So then we can look at those conversations, kind of expanding on that and giving that reasoning to be able to put into words why I chose that evidence or how it supports the claim.
And going off of what Ashley was saying, giving them some specific strategies, like I'm thinking of the they say, I say templates, and looking at some student examples and talking about the moves that the writer needs to make in order to score high on this section.
Yeah, and I think writing moves, thank you for sharing that. And also Sydney, the building the bridge piece I think is important. And I also heard conferring. And so conferring with students around this feedback is so important. The they say, I say, which is that, deepening and strengthening the argument through analysis of the evidence. And I think sometimes even students need some language frames to support, like when we see that in the elementary writing where the student used the word which and then added on that dependent clause, if then statements, those kinds of things, those language supports can help them. And I think in addition, opportunities for academic dialogue around complex text, multiple text, right? That's going to support the reasoning piece. So thank you for those suggestions. Okay, we're gonna go back to 7th grade here and look at, oh no, I clicked a link, sorry. Going the wrong way. All right, for 7th grade, what were our thoughts from my middle school folks? What are the next steps instructionally for this?
Question.
Yeah, Annie, go ahead.
So if the claim doesn't answer the actual question, but the evidence that they provide supports the claim, even if the claim is, say, a 2 because they attempted, we still score the evidence based on the claim they gave, even if the claim were completely bogus. Not saying this one is, but I just know how our kids think sometimes.
Okay, Annie, I don't have the rubric up because I'm screen sharing this slide deck. Can you read what the developing category of the rubric says for evidence?
Yeah, hold on just a second.
Sorry, I just don't have it open because I have this slide deck.
Okay, so for evidence, the level 3 says includes facts and details from the text, but only some support are relevant to the claim and reason stated. And then citation of evidence and or use of in-text citations is inaccurate.
Okay, and then what is the 4?
All facts and details from the text support are relevant to the claim and reason stated. Citation of evidence and or use of in-text citations has minor inconsistencies.
So my thinking would be I would not score them above a 3. Are there other thoughts on this call where if they wrote a claim but it is not relevant to the prompt, but their evidence supports their outlandish claim, it's still not relevant to the prompt? What are your thoughts on that? Anyone else take a different path on that?
Will you say yours again?
I would not score it above a 3.
Because they're not answering the question asked.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. Next instructional steps for grade 7.
I don't want to be the only one answering questions, but
I appreciate you, Wendy. Thank you.
good.
Well, here's what I'll say for middle school. A couple of things. We can see that reasoning and reason and claim, counterclaim are very low because there is no counterclaim. But the low-hanging fruit for support that we could probably take care of rather quickly is that there's no introduction, right? And so that would be a piece I would immediately address. And then based on the upcoming instruction, assuming that probably lots of 7th graders are needing support with reasoning and counterclaim, I'm going to build in really strategic opportunities for those students around those 2 pieces, and maybe provide this student with some more individualized support around the reason and organization. Any other thoughts on that from our middle school folks?
I'm sorry, I wanted to just go back, back to what you said before, but that whole idea about, if they create a claim and evidence and they do some solid writing that's aligned, but it not necessarily answering the prompt as given. And I don't know if that's a conversation right now, but if that's just something, in the future, I think for me, more clarity on how to approach that, because especially with ESL, a lot of times they just might misunderstand some of the wording in the prompts. And I'm sure it's not just my kids, they read it wrong. And then, but they'll make a claim, they'll put evidence that, they'll try to follow the steps in the format. So for me, it's hard to say, I'm going to score it super low, because I know they tried and they really did the best they could. And they were thoughtful about the pieces of it. So, I'll usually look, you did misunderstand what the prompt was. It was actually asking you this, but let's just pretend your prompt was this, and this is how I'm going to score you. But, I don't know, when it's district-wide stuff, kind of what, the consensus needs to be, because I want to make sure I'm in line with the calibration of stuff, if that makes sense.
I just think I'm a little confused
How would
about
they
the question altogether, because when I'm looking.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just asking, how would they look at it on a state assessment? How would they handle that?
They would score them as a developing or apprentice writer, right? Yeah.
I feel like I'm a little confused because of the question that was asked. So when I'm looking at this question and I'm thinking about reasonings, and I look at a level 3, it says all the reasons that they provide have to support the claim. But what if the evidence doesn't support, the evidence doesn't really match? So then we're rating them on their evidence at that point. So when I looked at this, I broke it all out. I would have broken it down a little further. And so maybe their evidence, I'm going to rate them, if that was the case, I would rate them a 1 or a 2. But maybe I didn't hear the question correctly.
Yeah, so we have a couple of different questions
Okay.
around that evidence piece, where their claim doesn't address the prompt, but it is a claim, right? But the evidence that they chose is sort of well done, right? That's just sort of the scenario, right? So that's the question, is where does that evidence score fall in the rubric? The question that Ashley is asking around ESL students and, whether or not they, they wrote and they tried. So, where are we scoring them? And as a former teacher of English learners, I can appreciate your position on that, but I think something to remember is this need not be a grade, right? The point of the benchmark is to move literacy forward and to provide students feedback and support and the instructional plan that they're going to need to grow as writers. And so I've seen some PLCs blind score students so that we aren't feeling that, well, look, this kid, he tried so hard. Well, that may be true, and we can all appreciate that, but we are not doing that student any service by scoring him a 4, because then we're not necessarily providing the corrective instruction or the acceleration or the support or the feedback that that student needs to move their writing forward. So that would be my response to that, would be to score the writing as it is in front of you against the rubric. And because the intention is to use this formatively to support instruction, if that makes sense. Ashley, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Jenny, are there other questions in the chat? Anything we need to raise up?
I'm just seeing some comments over here around sort of the conversation that just happened. One of the last ones is if it was a district assessment, they would score it lower. But if I was using it as a formative assessment, I would know my student can provide a claim and evidence and work on understanding the prompt instead.
Yes. So that could be a check for your EL students as you're doing the ThinkCERCA benchmark, ensuring that they understand the prompt, right? We have in our information to principals shared that if a student is getting accommodations, like has a reader, a scribe, extended time, whatever, that they should get that on this assessment as well, and that you can use the read-write extension, for example, for that piece, but that we wouldn't go over time and a half. So no more than, for secondary, no more than 90 minutes. So they should be getting those accommodations. I wouldn't see, anything wrong with just ensuring, okay, or do we understand the prompt? Your EL students, I think, would be fine. We're going to go up here to 4th grade. Elementary school folks, what would you work with? What would your next instructional steps be with this student?
Hey, Suzanne, there was a comment
Yes.
further up. A question around this one. It says that the word attempts is used for reasons, reasoning, and organization, but a score of 3 is given. So there's some confusion by this, that there would have been an expectation of a score of 2 rather than a 3 because it's attempts.
For the elementary one?
Yes.
Okay. And actually, I did an elementary session with AIS schools, I guess it was yesterday, and we changed the score. They had a higher score for reason, and we downgraded it to a 3. And so I can see what you're saying. So here there's no introduction. So there's no introduction. There's an attempt to group ideas together. So that's the first level of the rubric, grouping ideas together. So you'll see in that elementary example that there is a claim, there's evidence, there's reasoning with that which dependent clause, and then there is a conclusion. And so this is the rationale for a 3, but I certainly can understand why you would give it a 2. So I think that's the point of these calibration conversations, is that we are really digging deep into student writing and that we have that common understanding.
Right. And that was my comment. I don't know. I might be the only elementary person here. I haven't seen any other chatter, but I think I was relating that to the general rubric at the beginning where it said the attempts were a lot of times a 2.
Mm-hmm.
But in this rationale, that word attempts is used multiple times, but the score was 3. So that was confusing. As far as next steps, I mean, those areas that are lower would be the focus, organizing, and then just like that, adding additional evidence and reasoning, because honestly, I feel like the evidence, they came out pretty clear. They used a specific piece of evidence, but other than that, in the sample, it almost feels like the kid keeps saying the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, I agree, Amy. And originally, so for the reason, in the materials we received from ThinkCERCA, they had given that a 4. And I don't think it's a 4 because it is really redundant with the claim. And
right,
so I
it's
agree
almost
with
the
you.
same thing.
Yeah, it's really redundant. So it is a reason, but it's not fleshed out. And so, but I love this piece with number 2, and the reason I added this here is that this is a strength-based approach here. This student is really strong. This evidence is cited, it's from the text, it's hyper relevant to the claim, and so that's a strength for this student. And so I think building on that strength is an important instructional move as well. And so that's why I added that number 2 here. All right. And so going on to this slide right here, what I've linked in here for you is for 4th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 10th, there is a Google Doc linked here that has 3 student samples for each of those grade levels. And so the idea would be and there's a couple of ways that you could do this. You could pull the color-coded examples from here and use these student examples that we've provided and ensure that your PLCs are calibrating in their rubric scoring. And the point is that if I am on an 8th grade team at Stewart, that I have a sense of what proficient 8th grade writing looks like, and that I'm going to have similar scoring with my PLC colleagues, so that we are, students are having an equity of experience here, all getting feedback, and that we are planning those instructional moves forward. You could also do this same calibration with your own students' work. You could use kind of the same protocol with your own students' work if you want, or you can use this existing work. I would say in some of our schools, we are not always assigning or giving feedback on student work at the grade level. And so I do think there would be a benefit to looking at some of the samples that were provided here, just to make sure that we are really ensuring we're scoring appropriately, so that we're giving the most appropriate feedback and instructional support for that student moving forward. Because again, there is no benefit to inflating the scores. The idea here is that this is going to give us a sense of where our writers are, and that we can use this data formatively to support their writing, their literacy moving forward. And so these are all linked in here. And this is a process that you can go through with your PLCs back in your building. And so there are some FAQs here. This one is really important. On the rubric, it says reasons. Does this mean it must include more than one reason? No. And here's why. And I think this is really important for our secondary folks. When we think about 5-paragraph essays, I know we've all read some 5-paragraph essays that are sandwiches for body paragraphs, right? Claim, evidence, analysis. Claim, evidence, analysis. There's very little analysis. The claims are cookie cutter. There really is no evidence of critical thinking or any sort of ideas that are synthesized by the student, right? So we would rather, if we're good writing teachers, support students going deep with fewer reasons, right? We know that even if they have a singular reason that is very strong, supported by multiple pieces of evidence, and has strong analysis associated with it, that's far better writing than the cookie cutter 5-paragraph essay that has the 3 reasons, the evidence, that is very, very brief and very surface level. And so I think that's an important thing to remember about this rubric, that we, and in our writing instruction, that we want to go deeper with the thinking rather than broad. And so there's some other questions here, some FAQs that you may want to go over. And there's an example here of reasoning and what that could look like. So that could support your PLCs. Again, leveling in the rubric, the grouping of ideas together is prioritized over, say, transitions, right? And that's listed as such in the rubric, and so that should be prioritized in the scoring. And so the next steps for this work are to go back to our PLCs, ensure that we're calibrating our understanding of what quality writing looks like using some of these samples, and then you'll give the benchmark, give feedback, and then plan your instructional next steps. And so we will be providing that data for you on your students' performance. So you will get a spreadsheet that shows student name, holistic score, rubric breakdown. If you're an AIS school, on February 12th, we're going to have a deep dive into student writing, and we're going to do some goal setting around infrastructural and instructional goals for literacy based on this data. And so that's kind of our steps moving forward. It is 4:31, so I am 1 minute over. If you have the information you need, again, those tools are linked in there. There's a video with how to even just do the grading, the nuts and bolts. And then you should have a decent process here for your PLCs to be having a common understanding of what quality looks like. If you have questions, you're welcome to stay on. If you don't, please put your name in the chat. There's no sign-in sheet. If you would just put your name in the chat, we'll use that to get you all in PD Central. And if you asked your principal for a school stipend and they approved, that's on there as an option. So again, if you have questions, stay on. If not, thank you so much for coming and all that you're doing for kids right now.